Welcome to episode 77 of the How to Japanese podcast. I'm Daniel Morales from howtojapanese.com, and it's June 2026. So otsukare-sama deshita. We made it. Is it just me, or is it starting to get hot in here? We got lucky at the beginning of this month with an early typhoon that came through and kind of cooled things off after they'd gotten a little bit warm there at the end of May. But the last week or two here in Osaka has started to feel closer to summer, even if it's not the worst it's going to be. So I hope you all stick around for my recommendation at the end of the podcast, which will be related to cooling down this summer. And I'll be going over my newsletter and the blog post this month, which are going to be a little bit shorter probably during the even months. I mentioned this last month, but during the even months, I'm going to be looking back through my blog archive and going over topics that I've discussed before, but maybe haven't written about for the newsletter, things that could use more attention, to give myself some time to work on other writing projects, notably my Murakami review. I'm working on a review of his 4 short stories / novellas that he published in Shincho over the past 2 years that it seems he'll be packaging into a novel in July. Potentially with extra material. We'll see. You'll have to wait for my review for that. I just re-listened to my review episode for The City and Its Uncertain Walls, and I'm pretty happy with that review still, and I'm pretty happy with the follow-up to that review that I posted when the English versions came out. I did a quick look at a couple of the English language reviews. It really does seem like that book came and went without really leaving any sort of mark whatsoever on the popular culture consciousness. And I think that's probably going to be the same for this most recent novel. And that's maybe a little bit of a spoiler for my review, but I'll be getting into the specifics of what he did, maybe why he was doing it, and what he might be doing for the novel. We'll see. But in this episode, I'll be going over something that I think is probably the most important sentence to know in a Japanese business environment. And I say that as somebody who has made superlative comments about 2 Japanese vocab words pretty recently, which was kakunin, which I think I probably called the most useful kanji compound, and jiko. And I then followed up with jiko, calling jiko potentially even more useful than kakunin, although kakunin being a verb, jiko being a noun, have slightly different usages, but I mentioned those in 2 episodes in the recent past. And so this time I'll be looking at a different sentence structure, which I think is also extremely, extremely useful. One other thing to note is that as I'm doing this, I'll be doing this a little bit more shooting from the hip, not scripting out the podcast, which is something that I've done for since I restarted them. In the past, I went off of an outline or did interviews and things like that. And then when I restarted for season 4, this kind of continuous ongoing season of the podcast, started scripting it out a little bit more and actually re-listening to my review episode of The City and Its Uncertain Walls, specifically the one covering the English reviews, which then replayed my review of the Japanese version. It's pretty apparent that the scripted version was a lot higher quality. And I like that quality, but again, trying to buy myself some time to work on these other writing projects. So we'll see if I can't go a little bit more unscripted. And I'll just have to say it's an Elden Ring issue. It's a skill issue. And I just need to get better at not umming and awing and speaking a little bit more clearly. Although I am really curious to know if anybody else has podcasts out there. Are you editing yourself? Are you scripting yourself? The podcasts I listen to sound pretty professional. A lot of them are talking heads who have become talking heads after being columnists for a long time. So they have a lot of years of practice. I'd be curious to know how much they're edited. I'm sure that there is a good bit of editing. And obviously, I'll be doing some editing here, cutting out bits that don't work. I've already stopped and started once. Hopefully you didn't notice because it was right after the very beginning. But we'll see how this goes. This month, I started this even month newsletter reprieve by looking exactly 9 years ago, which is half of my blog's lifetime. It's hard to believe, but I've been writing How to Japanese for 18 years now, which doesn't even seem like possible, but it's an objective fact that I did start this blog in 2008 at the tail end of my career as a teacher on the JET program. And 9 years ago would put us in 2016, 17. And let me just make sure. Yes, 2017. 2017 in June, I would have been living in Chicago and still working at the Japanese consulate at that time and writing for the Japan Times. I started writing for the Japan Times more frequently in 2014. And so often my posts from around 2014 to 2020 coincided with whatever I'd published in the Japan Times. In June 2017, that happened to be about the website Yahoo Chiebukuro, which, if you don't know, is equivalent to, oh, I can't remember the English for it. Here, this is going to be the magic of podcasting. I'm going to pause, find it, and then I'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and I have some interesting information. Apparently, the English equivalent of Yahoo Chiebukuro was called Yahoo Answers, and it was shut down on May 4th, 2021, which is incredible because the Japanese version remains online. So essentially what we have here is an Oshman's situation. Oshman's being the obscure sports apparel store from the US that is, I think, now closed there and open still in Japan. Also, probably more recognizable in places like Dean and DeLuca, which is now shut down. A popular kind of, what do you call Dean and DeLuca? Deli / restaurant / grocery store, extremely fancy, expensive grocery store that shut down in the US and is now still kind of ongoing, has a life of its own in Japan. Toys R Us being another great example. There's a Toys R Us within a 10-minute bike ride of me that very much is still selling toys and is for us. And now it's interesting to know that Yahoo Chiebukuro is basically the digital equivalent of that. So in June 2017, I wrote about that for the Japan Times, and I kind of cataloged all the different posts. In that specific blog post that I wrote, I looked at a Yahoo Chiebukuro post for which eye you're supposed to use first when you fill in the eye on a daruma. So daruma, if you all don't know, are these kind of good luck statues in Japan. I'm sure it's a little bit more complicated than that. They have two blank eyes. When you buy them, you fill one in and you kind of make a wish or something like that. And then you fill in the other eye once you've completed whatever that is. And I found that in general, you do the first left and then right when it comes true. And then for elections, usually politicians would use this. It would be first right and then left when you're elected to be, that seems to be most common. Although apparently the political campaign stopped using it after disability groups complained that filling in daruma eyes discriminates against those with vision impairments. So I imagine that's probably not being done anymore. But interesting that for whatever reason, it was opposite for elections as it was for general wishes and things like that. So I wrote about that. I have a list of all the other articles that I looked at. And as I was kind of looking through my back catalog of blog posts related to Yahoo Chiebukuro, I found an incredible one that I posted about in 2019, January 2019. I wrote about the word saiwai, saiwai desu, more specifically. So saiwai is an adjective. Saiwai is the character for shiawase, happiness. And it's used when making requests in Japanese, which I've written about this before. Making requests in Japanese is a fraught experience. And that's not just me saying that. That is something that my Japanese professor taught me in college. So much so that she had a set of phrases called airbag phrases that she recommended students deploy when making a request in order to soften that request and not surprise the person that they're making the request of or asking the question of. And I think that's smart for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's polite language, and second of all, and polite language is good, I would say, especially in Japan. And second of all, it's warning the person what is about to happen. You're giving them a heads up. You're letting them see into the future of the conversation. As you start saying what you're about to say, they can already envision what's about to happen, and it prepares them, lets them prepare mentally for that happening. It gives them the ability to kind of get into the conceptual frame of mind to understand you better, I think. That's an interesting way to think about it. Or I've always thought. So, Saiwai Dis. Why is Saiwai Dis interesting? Why was I writing about it in 2019? Because it looks like this 2019 post was just kind of a monthly post that I was kind of knocking out for the blog. That was my goal, 1 post a month once I got busy. After I started the blog, 3 posts a week, and then that became untenable with grad school, moving back to the US, and then having a full-time job. And once a month was my goal, and that still is. And so why did I choose that? I didn't have a Japan Times article accompanying this. In 2019, I had been at my new job for under a year. I was going on business trips to Japan. I was kind of working with the Japanese organization and liaising them to the US organization that they were all members of. And so I was making requests constantly of them via email often. And I was using this pattern with Saiwai-desu, which, as I mentioned, is the character for shiawase. And I'm sure I learned this phrase in college. And then I'm sure it was re-emphasized to me when I took a kind of business Japanese crash course with a one-on-one instructor just before I started this job. I had 2 weeks off, and so I took like probably 5 to 6 hours maybe total. And I'm sure that we must have gone over something like this. And so this phrase that I'm about to share with you all is using Saiwai-desu. So Saiwai-desu literally would mean something like, or actually, to be honest, I won't tell you yet because I did not really know what it meant. I could see that it was the same as shiawase, the same character. Saiwai-desu was basically the same as shiawase desu, or maybe even something like ureshi desu. Close, that might be closer in something that I think is more natural and basic conversation. But the phrase is nani nani shite itadakereba saiwai desu. Nani nani shite itadakereba saiwai desu. So that what we have here is the conditional form of itadaku. So we take itadaku and make it itadakeru, which is could I receive. Itadaku is I receive, polite, right? Itadakeru is could I receive? Do I have the potential to receive? And then I make it conditional with putting the ba on it. So itadakereba saiwai desu. Itadakereba saiwai desu. And so to look at a specific example, say I have something that I need somebody to submit to me by the end of the day. End of the day in Japanese would be teiji. So I would say, and submit teishutsu. So if I was going to use this in a phrase like that, I would say something like, teiji made teishutsu shite itadakereba saiwai desu. Teiji made ni, or maybe even teiji made. I'd have to look into which one of those is more correct, but I imagine that both of them will get your point across. Teiji made ni teishutsu shite itadakereba saiwai desu. And so I knew this as a polite phrase that I could use to make a request of somebody. And what it literally is saying is, if I could humbly receive you submitting whatever it is that's being submitted by the end of the day, I would be saiwai, right? And I think what threw me off is the difference between saiwai and shiawase, right? And the conjugation there, I felt like as a young student, there must be something different. They're different, right? What is it? What is it? Why are they different? What does it mean? Why wouldn't you just do shiawase? Why wouldn't you just do ureshi? Spoiler, you can just do ureshi. I'll get into that in a minute. But I found a great Yahoo Chiebukuro post in 2019. I guess I kind of got frustrated not knowing the answer. And when I looked on Yahoo Chiebukuro, I found an amazing post. Somebody asked the question, and I'll read it out here. 何々していただければ幸いですの幸いってどういう意味？よくメールなどのやり取りで、例えばオークションで商品が到着しましたら連絡をいただけると幸いですという言葉を見かけます。自分も真似をして使う時があるのですが、よく考えたらどのような意味になるのかよく分かっていません。So this is a person saying, this is a phrase I see all the time, and I even imitate it myself and use it, but when I really thought about it, I don't know what it means. And then the person goes on to say, なんとなく助かりますという意味になるかなと思ったりしていますが、I feel like it must mean like 助かります or I appreciate it, something like that. And the best answer, so on Yahoo Chiebukuro, if you're not familiar with it, the best answer I think is voted on by the person who wrote it potentially, or maybe it gets automatically given to the person who had the answer with the most naruhodo responses. I'm looking, actually, I can see that there's other responses with the same number of naruhodo marks, so that must not be true. But this best answer, I think probably designated by the poster, is this. This is what it says. 文字通りそうしていただければ幸せだということです。そこには望ましい、ありがたい、都合がいいなどの意味が含まれています。日本語の美しさの一つです。And I love this little response because it's super straight to the point, and it says literally, it means if you did that for me, I would be happy. And within that is also included the meaning it's desirable, I would appreciate it, and it would be convenient. All of those are kind of wrapped up into saiwai desu. And they say, this is one of the beautiful aspects of the Japanese language, almost like that satirical movie series comedy set of videos that I introduced, Sushi, the sushi set of videos when I was talking about the podcast with, I'm going to pause here and go get the comedian's name. Katagiri Jin. That's his name, Katagiri Jin. And the set of videos that we looked at was the Nihon no Bunka, I believe. The Japanese tradition. Yeah, there we go. So, saiwai desu. Beautiful example of Japanese. Means all of those things, but essentially means I would appreciate it if, I would be pleased if you could do this for me. And it's a kind of indirect, maybe quote unquote Japanese way of making a request, but you see it so frequently in the office. And there's several different ways to structure this, right? Itadakereba is only one of the ways you can conjugate the kind of conditional phrase with itadaku. You can also do itadaketara, right? You could also do itadakemasu to. And then in the Yahoo Chiebukuro version, we also saw itadakeru to, which is the direct form. I was using all distal forms. Itadaketara, itadakemasu to. Saiwai desu, itadaketara, saiwai desu. Those are all different ways you can write that. You can also swap out saiwai. So you can swap out saiwai for any one of the kind of meanings, words that express the meaning that Yahoo Chiebukuro poster just mentioned, such as tasukarimasu, arigatai desu, ureshii desu. Tasukarimasu being I would be helped by. Arigatai desu, meaning I would be pleased if. Ureshii desu, I would be happy if, right? So you could just as easily say, teiji made ni teishitsu shite itadakereba tasukarimasu. Or teiji made teishitsu shite itadaketara arigatai desu. Or teiji made ni teishitsu shite itadakereba ureshii desu. All of those essentially mean the same thing. You can kind of fine-tune the nuance here and there if as needed, but I think saiwai desu is probably a good default phrase. Itadakereba saiwai desu is probably a good default request at a Japanese office environment. And to kind of prove my point, there was an incident recently that I think really made waves in the Japanese consciousness for about a week or two. And I don't know if I think it was reported on a little bit in English outside of Japan, but the Yomiuri Giants manager Abe Shinnosuke recently had to resign from his position because he was involved in this kind of very bizarre domestic incident. And I don't want to like make light of this too much because it involves some very serious accusations, including potential child abuse, and also involves AI. Uh, my understanding of the event is that there was some kind of confrontation between Abe and his daughter. And after that confrontation, his daughter input some questions into ChatGPT. ChatGPT encouraged her to report what happened to an organization. The organization then contacted the police, and this caused a massive kind of media kerfuffle, which I understand is the word kerfluffle. I always thought it was, but kerfuffle is the word. And I'm going to hope that it was all a big misunderstanding. Judging based on my immediate Japanese friends' reactions, there were people on all sides of this issue, including a lot of people blaming the daughter for using ChatGPT and reporting him. I feel like that's not the right person to be angry at here. I'm not going to get into it too much, but I was curious about the language used here because I had to like read an article to understand what was going on and why people were reacting so intensely. So I read an article about it, and I had already started writing this newsletter when I did, and I was kind of surprised to see itadakereba saiwai desu in his apology, specifically addressed to the media. The manager made this comment. He said, "Atakaku mimamotte itadakereba saiwai desu. Atakaku mimamotte itadakereba saiwai desu." So literally he's saying, I would be saiwai if I could receive you kind of warmly protecting my daughter. Warmly protecting being a very literal translation of atakaku, warmly, mimamoru, protecting. Your translation, I think, would probably be any translation would probably be much more natural than that. I broke it down that way so we can kind of understand what the Japanese is doing. But essentially, he's asking the media to take his daughter into consideration when they're doing their reporting. I was wondering whether this was unique phrasing or not. So I started looking for this atakaku mimamotte itadakereba saiwai desu to see whether it was something that he had created or if it's a kind of more regularly encountered phrase. And I did find that the search in quotes turns up 48,000 hits on Google. So it's not like super common. But the results are also not dominated by that news story. So it seems like familiar but not too common a phrase. I found a couple examples on threads that I used in the newsletter, including one about kittens that will be up for adoption, which seems to make sense. Those are things that you would want to protect warmly. So imagine the coach was kind of drawing from this pool of kind of collective language that we all kind of populate. And that was the phrase that made the most sense to him. Itadakereba saiwai desu is that kind of phrase when you're kind of humbly asking somebody to do something for you. One little podcast bonus nugget that I forgot to include in the newsletter is that you don't even need to say saiwai desu. And maybe that's why it's a good thing I didn't mention it in the newsletter, since the newsletter is ostensibly about saiwai. But because that itadakereba phrase has become so connected with making requests in Japanese, you can just assume the rest of what you're trying to say without even saying it. And what you do when you do that is you say, itadakereba to omoimasu. Itadakereba to omoimasu. itadakereba to omoimasu. And in this phrase, I was just thinking for a moment, you don't really see like itadakimasu to omoimasu or itadaketara to omoimasu would be maybe a little bit more natural. Itadaketara to omoimasu would probably be work as effective Japanese, but you hear it most frequently as itadakereba to omoimasu, and then you don't even have to say what you are. You just, it would be if I could receive this, I think, literally is what that means. So, teiji made ni teishitsu shite itadakereba to omoimasu. And maybe this is more of a spoken version now that I think about it. You often kind of hear this in a spoken conversation or at a meeting when maybe you don't need to waste all that space, which is interesting to think about. I'd be curious to kind of look into that a little bit further. But if you start to see that phrase either written or spoken, that's what's going on. You're seeing a request. And this reminds me of the Japan Times article I wrote about incomplete sentences in Japanese and how prevalent they are. And maybe that's something I'll be writing about in August. So note to self, if we look, let's take a look at incomplete sentences in August or maybe in October. But that's what I wrote about in the newsletter. In the blog, I wrote about another use of saiwai. Saiwai, if you look it up, has a couple different definitions. And obviously one we just went over is ureshi, shiawase. Another is fortunate or lucky. And the way you use this phrase is saiwai na koto ni, and then you say what you are lucky or fortunate to have done. And let me see, did I find any good examples of that? I did. I found an example from shogi player Kato Hifumi, who passed away earlier this year, but posted this on Twitter back in 2017 when he was 77 years old. And he says, Hifumin wa saiwai na koto ni 77歳を迎えた現在も体力、気力、知力、情熱、意欲、食欲、そのいずれにも限界や衰えをみじんも感じないのです。So he feels not even a smidge of a limit or any reduction in his endurance, intellectual ability, passion, desire, and appetite. And so he's fortunate to have to be able to say that. He's saying at the beginning of this phrase, saiwai na koto ni. So fortunately, and then you kind of say what you're fortunate or lucky to have had happen. And the other example I found was saiwai na koto ni, let's see, higai ga nakatta. Let's see, I think, is that what it was? Yeah, kaze mo omotta hodo tsuyoku nakatta. Somebody going to their backyard after a typhoon, the recent typhoon, and seeing that the winds had not been as strong as they thought they would be. And actually, this brings me to an interesting little point, which is that it's very difficult to search on Twitter anymore. Unfortunately, I don't use Twitter anymore. I've kind of put my account on private and just kind of left it there because I don't want somebody taking the name and posting stuff on How to Japanese, which I've kind of taken as my digital real estate. And so I'm just kind of leaving it. But I do occasionally go on there to kind of look for language uses just because so many Japanese people are still using Twitter. But the search function has really degraded really quickly. Previously, you could do quote searches and it would turn up really useful examples. It would very specific examples. And the last time I did a really close comparison between the search features on all the different social media websites, Twitter was by far the best, and all the other websites were not even close. Now it's basically all about the same. One person on Blue Sky did note to me that you can search on Google by searching site : and here you have to search x.com and then add your search in quotes. And that is kind of how I was able to find that specific shogi example from 2017. And the other example I found, I think on Threads, just by kind of like plowing through a million different results for saiwai. And speaking of searching on Google, that reminds me of one interesting example I found for itadakereba. Itadakereba saiwai desu. And that is from the From Software. This will be a podcast special because I didn't mention it in the newsletter. This will be a podcast special from Software. From Software, the maker of the Souls games, Elden Ring, Armored Core, and they're releasing the Nintendo Switch 2 version, I believe in August, and you can pre-order it. And so on announcing this, their PR account, they have a very interesting little phrase, and it is よろしければぜひご予約いただければ幸いです。よろしければぜひご予約いただければ幸いです。So the phrase we were looking at is ご予約いただければ幸いです which shows a nice polite way. Once you use the go in front of the verb compound, so ご予約, you don't need to use the して anymore. You don't use the te form of suru. So you can say ご予約いただければ幸いです. Or even the example that I used earlier, ご提出いただければ幸いです would be what you would say instead of 提出していただければ幸いです. But here, they have two conditional ba phrases in the same sentence. So よろしければ if you like it or if it's okay, よろしければぜひご予約いただければ幸いです. So it's this ければ幸いです. This is really interesting. I didn't know that that's something you could do, but maybe with よろしければ it's a bit of a unique situation. よろしければ being kind of this set phrase that you see at the beginning of sentences and requests to kind of lighten things. It's a bit of one of those airbag expressions that my college professor used to talk about. So I just want to introduce that as interesting. I am looking forward to Elden Ring Tarnished Edition on Switch 2. Unfortunately, it's a key cart game, which means that it's not actually on the Switch 2 card, which means I think I am going to switch. I have two Switch 2 accounts because one I had for the US and one I had for Japan, but now they're both Japan because I switched my US one to Japan so I could get the Tagengo Switch 2. So now I have two Japanese accounts. So I think I'm going to switch my original Japanese account to the US account so I can get the English version of Elden Ring on Switch 2, which I'm desperately trying to platinum right now on PS5. I'm like 2 trophies away. I think I can do it before the Switch 2 version comes out. I'm excited about that. Okay, that's all I had for the newsletter this month. My recommendation for this month is pretty easy. I was struggling with this because I have a couple of travel recommendations that I haven't done I need to do a little bit more prep for. I don't want to just kind of drop it on the podcast without a little bit more prep. And I think those will be interesting. I need to work on those. So I was going to drop an ice cream recommendation, and that is Lady Borden. And it maybe brings us full circle because apparently it was an American company that now is really only a Japanese brand. It was licensed here in, it looks like 1971, if the Wikipedia is correct. And I had never really had it until I think the last couple of years, to be honest. I think I started exploring Japanese ice cream a little bit more frequently when I came back in 2022 after having gone back to the US for 12 years and gotten addicted to American ice cream, like Ben & Jerry's, which I would find at Jewel-Osco in Chicago for half off every other week or something crazy like that. And I would thus be keeping like 5 different flavors of ice cream in my fridge at any given time. So when I came back in 2022, I started just kind of eating everything that I could. And then probably around a year or two ago, I started to notice that not all of the ice cream is actually real ice cream. And I'm sure that's true in the US too. To be honest, this doesn't make Japan any better or worse, I would say. But you see these designations like ice miruku or what are the other designations? There's one for yogurt, but essentially there's some kind of level of milk fats that you need to be considered true ice cream in Japan. And Lady Borden is one of the few, Haagen-Dazs being the other, Lady Borden being one of the few. And there's one called Sof, S-O-F, that's probably a Japanese brand, but it's one of the other Japanese brands, and it looks like it's owned by Latte, I think, if I'm not getting that right. But it's amazing. It's the best ice cream in Japan, Lady Borden. And I'm currently on the hunt for the strawberry because I've heard the strawberry is excellent, and I can't find it. All I have is access to is the vanilla and the chocolate in large formats. In smaller formats, I had the matcha recently for the first time, which was good. They have a caramel vanilla, which is excellent. They have a cookies and cream, which is also very good. And apparently, there's a strawberry out there, and it's got my name on it this summer sometime. So if you have any leads on strawberry Lady Borden ice cream, or if you have any other recommendations for real ice cream in Japan, please let me know, because apparently real ice cream helps prevent dementia or something like that. Hold on, let me pause and figure out what I'm thinking about. Apparently this is a common misconception. Apparently there was a study done about high-fat cheese and full-fat cream as being associated with lower risk of all-cause death and vascular dementia, which was then kind of blown out of proportion by online articles to mean that ice cream is a brain-healthy food. I recently saw that on TikTok. That's where I saw that. And so, sorry, ice cream's not going to help you think any better, but it's going to help you feel better, especially this summer if you eat a lot of it. So that's my recommendation for this summer. Eat lots of real Japanese ice cream. And just a few Iroiro posts here at the end. The first couple of articles I linked to are rainy season posts. We are in the rainy season. It started on June 4th this year. I believe that's a couple days earlier than normal and later than last year. But the Japan Meteorological Agency has really interesting articles about how they define what the rainy season is, and also very specific data on who is and isn't in the rainy season, which regions in Japan, and when they enter and leave the rainy season. We've had not too much rain yet, but it does seem like it's coming tomorrow. It does feel like tomorrow here in Osaka, tomorrow being Saturday, June 20th. And it does seem like that will be maybe the first real day of the rainy season. I also have a blog post linked to about justification of Arabic text, not like why Arabic text, but literally justified text in terms of text that goes from one side of the margin to the other without a ragged edge. And it's very, very interesting. It's fascinating on the work that needs to be done and how Arabic is justified differently and from English text. And the takeaway, for me at least, was that an Arabic font is a small program. That's a quote from the article. Fascinating. I have to admit that I did not understand all of it by any means. But even if you don't read all of it, it includes a lot of really interesting interactive elements that you can go in and click on and see how Arabic text works. And if anybody's out there who's ever worked with Arabic text, I've worked with Arabic text for different projects. It is extremely frustrating. You need to have somebody who knows how it works. And justified text in Arabic is interesting because they don't justified text in English essentially adjust the spaces between words, but in Arabic, truly justified text adjusts the script, the length of the connecting script itself rather than the space between the words, which is interesting. But a lot of modern browsers force the justification styles of English text onto Arabic. So very interesting to see that. The one other note I have on the bottom of the newsletter is that you can link your Amazon Prime NBA League Pass with the official NBA app, which is something I did not know until Michael Camilleri, a software developer I am connected with on Blue Sky, noted that for me. And that was really eye-opening. I bought the League Pass for the playoffs, which was just like 5,700 yen. Felt like a pretty good deal, to be honest. and because you get all the games, but I thought I had to watch them on the Amazon Prime app. If you link it with the official NBA app, you can watch it there. You get the official broadcast, you get the official halftime shows, and you also have access to all possession replays, which is a true all possession replay. You can literally watch the whole game with all of the fat cut, no halftime shows, no timeouts, no anything. Even time between the possessions sometimes is cut, which is maybe a little bit frustrating, but you see every play, which is great. Sometimes missing things like the review. The one thing that I missed that was really frustrating was to see when John Starks stepped out and accused the Spurs Steph Castle of stepping out of bounds, which wasn't true. He did not step out of bounds. And to see him do that and influence the game like that, killer, because the Spurs could have won that game. But I'm officially over the Spurs' final loss. I'm surprisingly at peace with it, and I really enjoyed watching. I think the last few. I think I turned it on that connection in the finals, so I missed being able to do that for the first couple games of the finals, but then was able to watch the end of it, which was excellent. So I highly recommend doing that. It's such a good experience that I'm really considering getting the full league pass through Amazon Prime next year in order to watch through there rather than on Amazon Prime. It's 19,000 yen, which is pricey. That's pretty pricey. That's not a cheap ticket. But if you compare it to the cost of the playoffs, which is 5,700 yen, you get, you probably get like over 100 games in the playoffs, but you're going to get 82 games from every team in the regular season, which would make it really good value. And especially if you have a Japanese lunch break, you can catch all the West Coast games that are going to be live during your lunch break. And if there's a matchup you really want to see there, that's a really nice little feature to have. So something to think about. And just at random memories, the Spurs are always kind of connected with my experience in Japan because I happened to be here when they won the championship twice, once in 2003 and once in 2007. I was in Tokushima randomly in 2003, and I was following it on Yahoo Sports at a random internet cafe. And then in 2007, I was showing a friend around Kamakura, and we were like behind Inyakuji, and I was on my little garake and somehow managed to connect to the internet and find out that the Spurs had won. So that's always a nice memory. Following the NBA here has been a fun time, and having this league pass a little bit more accessible is super nice. Really, really nice. So something to consider. Okay, that's all I've got for the podcast this month. Look forward next month to a brand new, longer newsletter that I believe I've already written it out. So I just need to kind of get that all on, get it ready. And I'll be looking for past content to introduce to y'all in August. Hope y'all are keeping cool. Now that we're here, here's another good summer recommendation. Go to Uniqlo and get the UV cutting jacket because it makes a big difference, and it's good to protect from those UV rays without having to like load up with sunscreen every day. Okay, hope that helps. See y'all next month.